My name is McKeever Edwards, and this is an episode in the oral history of the Department of Anesthesia. I'm trying to cover the last 40 years. You may recall that Jim Eckenhoff's book covered the period from colonial times up to 1965, and now we're trying to bring that up to date by recording recollections of some of the senior members of the department. And our guest today is Skip Ellison, Norrig Ellison, who was professor for quite a while and has retired in the last few years. Skip, welcome.
Thank you. I thought I would divide into eras. The end of the DRIPS era, which was for 25 years, but I was only there for the first 5, and then the Woolman era, which was the next 14 years, and then the long neck era, which was the next 12 years. And it will take us up to about the year 2000 when Lee came. First of all, I got to say a very interesting thing about the way I was recruited to come here to Penn. I had come to medical school at Penn and planning on being a general practitioner. And despite the fact that many of the faculty were looking down on general practice, I remained true to that belief as I graduated. But I'd already started to have some waivers I wanted to go into anesthesia, mainly because Dr. DRIPS was such a charismatic chief and teacher for medical students as well as for residents. And I was in the Army in Vietnam. I wrote a letter to Dr. DRIPS saying that I wanted to come back to Penn, and I would talk to him when I got there. He said, well, I'm going to be over here next month. Why don't you look me up? So I did. I'm sure he must have checked my record, because you know how you have to now get letters of reference from 3 different people and all that kind of stuff. He just said, you were a resident? Fine, you got a residency anytime. And there was a question of when, because of the Vietnam War, I would be released from active duty. And he just said, that's okay. Whenever they get you out, you can come. And so I didn't start until September 1st because the Army would not release me until that day. And that annoyed me a little bit, but I missed the 2 months of orientation lectures, and I sort of took a year to catch up with some of the things that I had to learn. DRIPS was an interesting man. He was both a superb clinician and a researcher. And he also had a very big VIP practice. It was not uncommon for him to be in the operating room doing a case. Shortly after I started my residency, Enflurane, a volatile anesthetic no longer used, was approved by the FDA. And when the word came down that it had been approved, DRIPS made the comment, this drug has been tested on more corporation presidents than any drug in the history of mankind, because he combined his VIP practice with his clinical research. And I mean, when the president of Scott Paper came in for a procedure, DRIPS was going to anesthetize him, and he went up and he got him to agree to take Ohio 349, which was the name under which Enflurane was studied. And the other thing about him, whenever he was in the operating room, if there was an anesthesia resident who was not doing something, he would go into that room, because DRIPS would be talking continuously and teaching. And he was a superb teacher. When he left, the department was clearly one of, I think, the 3 best departments in the country, along with Columbia and UCSF. I won't say it was better than them, but I think it was equal of them. And at the time of his retirement, DRIPS had trained more academic anesthesia chairmen than anybody else. That says it for my era. I was a resident and a junior assistant professor. At the time, he became vice president for medical affairs and left the department. And Harry Bowman took over. When Harry became chair, we continued with the being one of the few departments in the country to have a Center for Excellence with a large group of young investigators. Harry Wolm being the lead one with his cerebral blood flow studies, but it was Peter Cohen with muscle relaxant, Ted Smith with his work on pulmonary physiology, working with Chris Lambertson, and several others. Unfortunately, during that time, I believe the NIH decided not to continue with centers of excellence of that type. And so we did not get that. And over the course of the next, the end of the Drifts era, of the Woolman era, the amount of money coming in for funded research almost dried up, except for Brian Marshall. I don't think there was much other money coming into the department for research. The department expanded greatly. We absorbed the previous private practice, which had been at a Presbyterian hospital. We had a active program going on at the Philadelphia General Hospital until that closed in 1976. And these programs were all active clinical programs. We had a huge clinical practice and a much larger department than had been under Dr. Dripps. Unfortunately, the income of the department was not handled well, I don't think, at that time. Not the income, but actually it was the collections. And that was a down point in the Woolman era, at the end of his era. When Dave Longnair came here, I think his most important action was the first thing he did was hire Tom Martin to be the business administrator. And very quickly, the financial situation of the department improved considerably to the point that we were able to pay off the debt that we owed the university for the past 2 or 3 years.
But let me just interrupt for a second, because you omitted the fact that you got a really good picture of this because you were the interim chair between Woolman and Longnecker.
Yes.
For what, a year?
For a year. It was exactly 1 year. I took over the job on September 1st, 1986, and then September 1st, 1987, Dave was here on this job. And he began to recruit. It was clear to me, and anybody who talked to Dave, that the charge to him from the dean was to revive the research arm of the department. We never faltered or lacked to give good clinical care. When Clyde Barker chaired a committee that reviewed the department, he commented that the clinical care was superb. They couldn't find anything wrong with it. And I said, just come to one of our M&M conferences, you'll find out what's wrong with our department.
Well, but at least we talked about
yes, we did. We did review them. But it was something that I wanted to say about your comment. But anyhow,
that you had
there are 3 things that a good academic department does. First of all, the sine qua non is good clinical care. If you don't do that, you don't have to do anything else. But the 2 things that separate the really great departments from a good department is their ability to do research and their ability to educate. And on education, that was one thing that Dr. Woolman actually put resources into. He recruited Frank Murphy as director of resident education, gave him the resources he needed, and backed him wholly. And we had a very strong department. We were very popular with medical students. We got consistently a few students each year would come to Penn, others would go elsewhere. But the department was really in very good shape when Dave was recruited to become the chief medical officer of the health system. And then Lee was recruited as his replacement.
And Dave Longnecker was chair for how long?
He was chair for 12 years, from 77 to, from 87 to 99.
So you think he left the department in better shape than he found it?
Definitely,
in all three categories?
Certainly on the financial thing, which doesn't count, but it's really a part of the clinical situation. The clinical care was as good. Research was much better with several different funded investigators going on. And our teaching, I did not think suffered. I don't think it had quite the emphasis that it had under Harry Woolman, but it did not suffer that much. So yeah, I think we were better in all three categories.
And the dean during Longnecker's time
was Ed Semler was the dean when he was recruited. Who recruited him? Shortly, it's interesting. Shortly after Dave came here, the medical school started having financial problems. Those problems were not really the medical school problems, they were the hospital problems. And the university pointed out to the medical school that there are many fine medical schools that don't own any hospitals. But this university owned two, Graduate and the University Hospital. And the solution was to spin Graduate off by itself. And they went kicking and screaming because they didn't want to leave. But they became the Graduate Hospital rather than the Graduate Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania. And they brought in Dean Kelly, who changed the administration of the hospital, the medical director, executive director, and that too became a not a profit making, but at least not a profit losing situation.
And Kelly was dean when you were the acting chief?
No, Ed Semler was still the dean when I was the acting chief.
That's right, he came back. Longnecker told me that he had to have these periodic meetings with the dean. I'm not sure whether they were quarterly or semi-annually, but getting ready for one was like writing a big term paper each time.
That's right.
Because he really required very detailed reporting, lots of numbers.
I'm sure that those papers must be somewhere. They were rather voluminous. I did not write them, but I had occasion to contribute some comments for them, and look at the sections of them. Dean Kelly was a controversial figure, I think. He didn't hesitate to step on toes, and he was very straightforward in that regard. But I thought he was fair. He gave you time to, well, for instance, Dave was given, well, I guess that was really Ed Semler who gave Dave the time to get the department in shape, and he did. But under Kelly,
I think he was a hard taskmaster.
Oh, he was.
But he got results. I think the medical school was much better off.
Oh, yes. I think so, too. He was in much better shape in every way.
Faculty recruitment, grant money.
He was a good recruiter. I guess his departure was related to that gene therapy substitution.
I'm not sure. It was a big deficit.
It was a malpractice case. It cost. They never did say how much money they settled that for, but apparently it was a lot.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of loss of face, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. When you started out after having finished your residency, did you start out doing cardiac anesthesia?
Oh, let me let me digress. Harry was a brilliant researcher. He was also, it was somewhat a surprise to a lot of us what a great clinician he was because he had spent so much time in his research. But Harry, when he started, was strictly known for his research. But where this was interesting, he worked through the operating room, but he felt that the department needed strengthening in critical care. So he started being an attending in the critical care unit. And from the comments I received from residents and other junior faculty, he was a very good clinical care attending. But it was under Dr. it's under Dr. Longnecker that the current system that we have, which really improved the clinical care for the critical care service. What I mean by that is we were very much confined to ventilator care and respiratory care with one was the
antibiotics.
Right. Well, what happened was
episodically.
David got together with Clyde Barker and said, let's have a combined service. I will put anesthesia residents on that service, you put surgical residents on that service, and we'll alternate weeks of having either an anesthesiologist or a surgeon as the attending for the service. And that changed things so dramatically. It improved the situation with our interacting with the surgeons on their cases and with surgical residents interacting with us.
And so the anesthesia residents were not just minding the ventilators, they
That's
were
right.
taking care of the
Right.
whole patient. But wasn't there a lot of resistance from some of the residents to that sort of a general patient care? Because
There was.
a lot of them put into anesthesia to avoid that, I think, or because
Well,
they didn't care for it.
And that's an interesting thing. If you think about it, at least I had the impression that a lot of people came to the pen. They were interested in anesthesia, but they were interested in critical care. And I knew at that time, the residency was 2 years, and I just took a third year of training as a fellow.
As I remember, it made a quicker path to the board exams. If you took a third year,
That's right.
The other alternatives was to practice for 2 years or something like that.
Yes.
And then you were eligible.
Now,
to
that's
take
an
board.
interesting thing. I had had 2 years of general practice residency at the Army. So at the end of my second year, I applied to the board, and they approved my general practice residency as being part of the training. So at the end of my second year, I took and passed the written boards. And I actually completed the oral boards before I finished my fellowship. It says
So
Dr.
that was
Drips.
ahead of.
I told Dr. Drips, I'm now board certified. And I had two board residents. He said, well, you're going to be the only board certified resident. They're a fellow. He figured I was going to ask him for a high raise, but he wasn't going to give me one because I was still doing fellow's work.
So, fellowship, cardiac anesthesia fellowship was just starting. You were the first.
I was the first one.
The first one.
Yes.
And you were the only one in that year, right?
Yes.
And there had never been any sort of a formal program.
No. That was one of the things that came into much greater emphasis under Harry. In fact, as Harry put it, in that academic program, failure to subspecialize is a disaster. And he actively, for instance, when I was a resident, OB anesthesia experience for us was terrible. It was so terrible that I told Dr. Drips, I'll go be a fellow here, but I want you to send me to Columbia for 3 months so I can work under Finster and Popper and really learn OB anesthesia. Because basically, While we were in the operating delivery room, was infant resuscitation. We really did not, the OB residents put in coils for anesthesia.
And injected them, or
Injected. We did not.
If I remember rightly, the whole thing was very haphazard. You weren't assigned to OB, but if you were walking down the hall with your box and there was a call, you had to run to the
labor room. Better that, I think, but not much.
I mean,
it annoyed me that the OB residents were putting in the coils, administering the local anesthetic. And we were there for the off chance that they might need us for resuscitation. And that's why the year that I was a fellow was the year when Brett Cucci started going over to the labor floor. And pretty soon that became a full-time job for him. It became such a full-time job that he started getting people wanting to be fellows in OB anesthesia. And that's when they recruited Ted Cheek and then later Bob Geiser to join. And that's really one of the stronger parts of the program now is their OB anesthesia fellowship.
And what other fellowships came along?
Well, there was neurosurgery, there was critical care. There were attempts to start a block fellowship, but I never thought it ever really materialized because there was no one area that you could point to and say we're doing blocks here all the time. I mean, there was a lot. You mean
nerve blocks?
Nerve blocks, yes.
Right.
And
but in vascular, we had Don Martin. I know for most of the year.
Yeah, as a fellow.
As a fellow.
And he's now doing a lot of that up at Hershey. There's one other area that I was active in that I was disappointed how little interest there was in the political aspects of medicine. I'm talking about the AMA and the Pennsylvania Medical Society, but I'm more importantly talking about the ASA and the Pennsylvania Society of Anesthesiologists. There had been one president from Penn before me. It was Nitzler back in the early 70s, I think. And I'm glad to see that since I've been president, I was president of the ASA in '96, we have had two people follow me. One of them unfortunately left. It was Jeff Applebaum. He's chair at University of Chicago and was president of the ASA. And just last year, Roger Moore came out of the Penn program. And in fact, under Woolman, when he went to Boron Lux Center in New Jersey, it was part of the Penn program. We rotated our residents through there.
And Bob Johnstone is fairly high in.
Well, Bob is he has a good chance. It was kind of interesting last year. The two people fighting for the position of Vice President for Scientific Affairs were both Penn graduates. It was Arnold Burry and Bob Johnstone. Arnold's down at Emory now.
So you started a trend, in a way.
I started a trend,
but you were always more interested in politics of all sort than most of the doctors that I knew. You were in local politics, weren't you?
Yeah, well, local politics. I've been a conversion. I was for many years the helper. My wife was the Republican committee woman in Haverford Township where we lived. We both became so disheartened with the Republican politics that we're now registered Democrats, and until I had a stroke, I was the Democratic committee man in my precinct. It was an awkward situation during the election when Obama and Hillary Clinton were running for presidency nomination, the other committee man was actively supporting Obama, and I was supporting Hillary. I was glad to see that I won the Democratic primary in my precinct, but in the township-wide and nationwide, of course, Obama won.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I'm speaking of politics, take it just a step further, no one really knows for certain. But I think the current healthcare reform is long overdue, that medical care is a right, not a privilege. And I do not believe the prophets of doom that you hear from the Republican Party these days, speaking rather narrowly now. I think that there are 30 million people guaranteed health care. These people with guaranteed payment of services. I don't know about now, but I do know that at the time that Kelly was dean, the University of Pennsylvania gave more free care than any other institution in the state. And
where did the money for the free care come from?
A lot of it came from the fact that if you've ever compared the reimbursement for a Medicaid to a Medicare patient, you can see where a lot of it came from. Our charges versus what we were reimbursed. And that was a problem. That hopefully will not be a problem in the future.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, it was coming from you suppose if you were uncharitable, you would call it the excess charges to
That's right.
people who had conventional insurance.
You're right,
Or,
and that's true. I think you gotta look at it that way.
Mm-hmm. So it was the poor people, the uninsured people who came to HUP were getting the care, but it was really being financed by people who were paying the full rate and their insurance companies. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that works. Do you think that the doctors are going to have to take cuts in salary?
No, I don't think so. I hope I'm not being Pollyannish on this, but I think that to make a living wage for the 30 million who are currently uninsured will offset if there is any loss the other way. In other words, if the fact that the people who are at the high end are not paying as much will be balanced off, or more than balanced off, by people on the low end who have not been paying anything essentially are now paying something.
But do you not think that Medicare type reimbursement rules will spread to other people so that doctors won't get reimbursed as much as they...
That already happens now.
Yeah.
I mean, what Medicare does today, third-party carriers do tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
In some way.
It's definitely a leader or trendsetter.
Yeah, and well, when they say they're going to do this, there isn't a lot we can do about it.
How much should doctors earn?
Oh, about 10% more than we get. That was my standard answer. The year I was interim chair, there were several people who talked to me about, well, I had to talk to everybody about their salary. But I had a standard answer for that I realized that you're worth 10% more than I'm willing to pay you, but I have to pay the dean $25,000 a month or whatever it was, and we just don't have it. Everybody took that.
Yes.
Oh, no.
They didn't have any choice.
Well, there were a couple of people that left. I mean, I don't know if Peter Winter was paying a higher salary at Pittsburgh when Mark went there, or the fellow that went to University of Washington, whose name I can't remember. But, you know.
What, do you think that the department now is, well, let's see, how long has it been since you were actively working in the department?
5 years. Well, in 2000, I retired. But I was asked if I would stay on for a while because it was an interim period, interim chair, and until things settled. So I actually worked my way into retirement in that when I got 65, I said, no more night call. And I left the heart service that day because I figured if I wasn't willing to do the heart cases at night, I shouldn't scarf them up during the day. And over the next 5 years, I went progressively from 80% of an FTE to 60% to 40%. And then in the year 2005, I said it's time. I was 70 years old. I figured it was time to step out.
And how, in retrospect, how was that? Because I think a lot of people have trouble getting away from medicine. They've done it all their lives, but there must be some time at which you're too old to do a good job.
Well, I wanted to, I think you and I can recall at least one person that probably should have retired sooner than he did. But I wanted to leave on my own terms before people had to ask me to leave. And it was really hard, even though I did it in this gradual fashion. When you finally walk out the door for the last time, I found it hard to I don't have to get up tomorrow, or the next day, or the next day. You know, it's very different, very different lifestyle.
When I retired the same year that you did, I guess, and then I came back and worked half-time in 2001, and I had I think
you went cold turkey from 100% to 0%.
Yes, I agreed to work, I think 25 or 30% in the year after I retired, but the way I did it was to do nothing for 6 months and then come back and work about half or 2/3 of the time. And I found that it was really physically hard, that night call, particularly night call, when you get to a certain age, you just can't work for 24 hours straight.
That's true. When I went off night call, I kind of thought maybe I could work on forever. But I'll give you a little reverse psychology. I was an intern and I was on call every other night. And the next year, I was in Triple Army Hospital in Hawaii. I went out to the Schofield Barracks, the 25th Division. There were 19 physicians in the 25th Division. And I thought, I'm going to be on call just once every 19 nights? I mean, this is great. But I'll tell you, it got to the point where on Monday I'd wake up and say, oh my God, I'm on call Thursday night. By the time Thursday came, well, I could hardly get out of bed in the morning. So you get used to it. I mean, when you're on every other night and you're up most of the night, it becomes a way of life. You're chronically tired, but you do it.
And you don't get so involved in other things.
Well, yeah, you don't get involved in any other things. But also, when you're 26, you can do a lot better than when you're 66.
But do you subscribe to this idea of recertification? I mean, didn't
Yes.
you not reach a point where you felt that you didn't know as much as the younger people? I mean, you know more about a lot of things, but I reached a point where I didn't feel like I was keeping up to date on
Well,
things.
I'll put it a little different. I felt one of the reasons I was interested in staying in the academic department was I think that it helps you to work with younger people, and you will stay up. I mean, if you have enough pride in your ability, you're not going to let some retirement committee tell you, well, you don't mix those two things together or something like that. And I think it does make us stay a little more alert than if we do. Anyway, there's one other thing I should comment about on the way that we taught anesthesia when I was a resident as opposed to now. Dr. Drips had a unique way of training. And the first 3 months as a resident, the only thing you could use was ether. Now this made a very tough job for Steve Hrabowski, who was the clinical director, because he had to find cases that I could handle. And the other first year resident. And the second 3 months you were allowed to use ether. I mean cyclopropane. The third 3 months we were allowed to use what was the only volatile agent available then, allothane. And finally, in the last 3 months of our first year, we were allowed to use muscle relaxants. And
So we used to joke about getting your Curare license.
that's right. And the thing about it, I mean, it sounds horrible now. You couldn't do it today because with all of the electrical instruments that are in an operating room, you can't have explosive agents. I think at the end of my first year of training, I was better on airway management by virtue of having had to do that, because there's nothing good about ether, in my opinion. I mean, I could wait till I could stop using it. I mean, it was slow, it stunk, it was guaranteed to produce nausea and vomiting. But you could, once you know how to do it, you could get a patient completely relaxed. You could take out the gallbladder with ether. I mean, it was not a problem. The problem was the surgeons hadn't had to tie knots because they couldn't use the bovie. And that was the other thing. The surgeons would look when they came in the room to see I was their anesthesiologist. And because I started the program in November or in September, I was behind all the other residents. Mm-hmm. So in December, when I was still using ether, and the other residents were all using cyclo, and then 3 months later they were all using non-explosive techniques. I was still there with cyclo, and they kind of thought, I guess this guy flunked his first.
When you started going around as visiting professor and as the ASA officer and things like that, did you really get to know how other departments worked, and were you able to compare them with the Penn department, either in their management or their teaching?
Slightly, yes. Not so much the management, teaching, but just to watch residents in other programs, both as more as a visiting professor, I think, than when I was doing it as a ASA officer. I was going to state society meetings more, and there you don't see it. But as a ASA, as a visiting professor, I would say that our program of teaching was equal to anyone that I visited. And I gave most of the credit for that to the fact that we had Frank Murphy as our really residency director, and he saw to it that we covered basics and covered them well.
Now, when we first started, when you first started, Dr. Drips always ran the complications conferences, the Thursday case conference.
Right.
And he tended to have someone present a case and then ask for comment from the medical student, the resident, the attending, and somebody in the laboratory and so on. That changed with Frank, didn't it?
It changed. One of the things that I thought Frank did in a way that somehow he presented cases, complications. Some of them were really questionable judgment calls. But he managed to draw it out of a resident in a non-threatening manner, I thought, which was really, I mean, it was such an art that a couple of times I went to other programs and suggested that, when I saw the way they were doing it, that maybe they should invite Frank and let him run on their case conferences and show you how to do it, because I don't think this was handled in a diplomatic manner.
They were browbeating the residents.
They were browbeating the resident, and the effect of that type of program is you don't bring your cases forward to discuss. And that's why I thought Frank was so much better. And Bob Geiser is doing it the same way, by the way. He learned from the master, and he's carrying it on.
And do you think that
He must have.
Yeah.
So I'm going to run out of battery life in about 20 minutes. So I wonder if we could move on. One of the things we wanted to do was to get reminiscence of like funny stories. You know, Dennis Burke stories. As an example. No Jeff Mandel stories.
Okay.
Yeah, do you...
Let me give you the first one I had as a resident. One day, I was in one of the GWAD ORs, and I heard from the orthopedic OR, which was around the corner down 100 yards, hard of hearing! You know what that was? That was Ted Smith, who routinely would, one of the new residents say, you know what one of the signs of congenital heart, they would say, of congenital syphilis is, don't you? No, what is it? So, I said, I'm sorry, I can't understand what it is. Well, I hear you. Then he goes,
Hard of hearing.
I would think that every new resident, at least half the class every year, he got him on that one. That was Ted's hallmark in the department, as far as I was concerned.
You didn't have very many funny stories from the open heart surgery rooms, did you?
No, I think
It was pretty serious all the time.
Alan Schwartz in the IV bottle.
what?
Alan Schwartz in the IV bottle.
Oh,
Oh, yes, I was a witness to that.
were you a witness to that one?
I was in the office when he came in, being chased by the resident. Yeah, I was a witness.
I had a lot of funny times in the ORs at Penn, and I'm chagrined that I can't point out any one. I was recently trying to think of something particularly humorous about Steve Provoznik, because Joel Kaplan is coming here next month, and he wanted to say something about him. What I did, and what I think is one of the better examples of teaching, was Provoznik's laws of anesthesia. Starting with rule number 1, you are not to anesthetize the patient that isn't there. And then they go down to the last one, which is block anesthesia always works. It's just some need more supplementation than others. And in between there was, if the case takes more than one page, it's long. But if it takes more than two pages, the survival rate is very small.
Yeah. You were really sort of one of the people who started the cardiac anesthesia here, weren't you? I mean,
Well,
I guess Harry and Alan and Minsky were the original staff people. But
The first year, they were the staff and I was the fellow. And they, to their credit, they took call every other night. And Drips would not let them off the call roster. So they took call for a year, every other night, plus taking their every 12th night in main OR. And at the end of 1 year, they sort of put it to him that we've been doing an awful lot for you. So they recruited me as the third member of the staff, and it was every third night. And it was that way when there were really only two rooms that were being used for hearts. Now there are occasions when they go to a third room. And I guess there's about 5 or 6 people now doing it.
More than that, they go to 4 rooms, sometimes 5.
Do they really?
4 or 5 during the day.
Yeah, plus Presby.
Oh, yeah, well, that's true. That was Presby was at it while I was doing it, and that became a real hassle because the Presby was so erratic. I mean, they had 4 cases a day, and then you wouldn't hear from them for a couple of days. Then we could never.
Hard to staff it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But were there things about the department that you wanted to change that you couldn't?
From day one, I wanted to change the ether thing. That's one. I don't think anybody, except maybe Seaver Rosick and Tom Kennard. In fact, when Harry Woolman made the decision very quickly after he became the chairman that there would be no longer volatile agent used in the OR.
No longer flammable agents. We got
Tom, I said, well, I know.
Got rid of ether and cycloprotein.
And Tom Kennard got up and said, I challenge you. And everybody in the room looked up and said, what are you challenging for? It's overdue. But I guess the Dennis Burke stories, and there were 3. I think all my time as a resident and a staff man, there was 1 year when I served like the perfect storm. With Henry Sausarillo, Dennis Burke, and Lee Mallett together. And it's a good thing they didn't go to work. They all went in different directions. I mean, I don't even know what happened and where he ever ended up.
Last I heard, he was down in South Carolina practicing in the same area as Marion. I can't remember his name now. He was a famous fellow. But he moved around a bit.
And well, Dennis went to Hopkins, and I lost track of him. But Lee Mallett spent his entire career out at Langsville. And I guess once I don't think he could have lasted at Langlaw if he was acting the way he did when he got together with those two. they were too intent, in my opinion, on disturbing Harry Molman or Alan Minsky, that they didn't bother me that much as a junior attending.
But they were bright guys,
Well,
but they made a real effort at being unconventional.
That's right.
And to the point of being irritating.
I mean, all the three of them, you could not criticize their quality of their work.
Well, Skip, thank you.
One thing about Dennis was, I want to tell you, his pop-up Jesus.
Oh, right. Yeah,
He
that
had
were
a
always-
little, the tackle boxes that we had, he would open his boxes, pop up, start the day.
Well, thank you for
Thank you.
coming and talking, and if this brings back a lot more recollections that you want to share with us, maybe we can do a second go around.
If I can think of some good, funny stories, I would like to, but and I'm disappointed that I can't, because I've had so much fun in this department. It was fun to come to work every day. And I really felt sorry. I've known a couple of people who hated their job every day, but they had to make a living. That wasn't my life. I enjoyed working with residents. I thought that the challenges that they produced, the questions they asked, kept me on my toes, and they kept me young.
Did you like working with residents who questioned you a lot, who said, why are we doing it? Why do you do it this way? Why don't you do it that way? And did you find very many residents like that?
I didn't find many residents like that, but I found them refreshing. And we would talk about it. And if they had a way that they wanted to do something, usually their way, unless it was something completely off base, like 100% nitrous, you may remember, Drip's way of anesthetizing the patient was to put the mask on, give them 100% oxygen for 2 or 3 minutes, and then give them 100% nitrous for 60 seconds. And then you worked oxygen in through the ether tank, and that's how you got your oxygen.
Through the copper kettle.
Through the copper kettle. And I thought this was blasphemous. But he did it, and so I did it. And I never saw any problems from it. But you had to be very careful with that. Today you couldn't do it, because the modern machine does not permit you to turn off the oxygen from you.
Well, of course, it was easier to do it when you didn't have a pulse oximeter beeping at you too, I think.
I kept looking at the bed, but I think it.
Yes, we did some things that looked unsafe in retrospect, but I guess it worked.
Yeah. Okay, well, I thank you. And I thank you, Jeff, for spending your...
That's right. For your post-call enjoyment.
It's entertaining. Even if we don't ever do anything with the tapes, just sitting here and watching.